Hey, deserving listeners, I thought I would answer some of your emails. This first email is something I normally wouldn't read on the air because it is an email that is saying very nice things to me. It's mainly just saying thank you for creating the podcast. And normally when I get these emails, I very much appreciate them and will reply and say thank you. And I'll try to soak in the positivity. But I thought I would read it because I think it exemplifies something that I want to exemplify and also raises awareness about something that I think we need to raise awareness about. So, Sylvia from Warsaw, Poland, she writes, it says, "Hello, Professor Kirk. I'm a psychologist and a psychodynamic therapist. I come from Warsaw, Poland. I am writing to you because I would like to express my appreciation and gratitude. I've been watching your channel for a few years, and I've learned a lot during that time. I got to know systemic therapy better. I loved reality shows more because of watching your channel. I respect and admire your knowledge. I like your sense of humor, and I appreciate your modesty. It's really rare in my life that I willingly consider someone as a role model. This year, I unexpectedly received an offer to conduct psychology classes for students of the University of Warsaw. It was very difficult for me to break through at the very beginning. When preparing to teach classes, I took into account your way of being, because if I had to choose, I would like to be a teacher like you. And I see that students also appreciate, for example, admitting mistakes and joking around a bit. Thank you for also your comment on the situation in Poland after the outbreak of war in Ukraine. It really gave me strength because there was an almost palpable atmosphere of paranoia in Poland. Those who took people in from Ukraine, including me, really felt like they were at war. Your comment really gave me encouragement. Thank you for your work." End of email. Yeah, so like I said, very nice email, very meaningful email to me. There was something about this that really, in terms of the positivity, that I want to highlight. One is that she mentions the naturalness, and I don't try to be natural, but I guess I allow myself to be natural, both as a podcaster and as a professor. I don't know exactly where that comes from, or if I just got lazy and then found that students responded to it or something, or I don't really have an uptight professional part of me that I can rely on or something. I don't know. But I appreciated that because I don't know if I usually get compliments in that way, and I felt seen. And when I watch other YouTubers or listen to podcasts and I really like the podcast or the YouTube channel, usually it's because of that quality of coming across as very natural. And there's various different ways to do that, but I appreciated that. The other thing that I want to highlight is that she's talking about how me talking about the war in Ukraine, Russia invading and occupying and killing innocent Ukrainians this entire time was encouraging. And I wanted to highlight that right now, including Ukraine, there are a number of conflicts or wars or civil wars or atrocities happening around the world, in addition to what is happening in Ukraine and in Gaza, of course. But there are other countries, other regions experiencing very similar atrocities and harm, but you never hear about it in American news. And when we look at the conflicts and the civil wars that we don't hear about, the theme is that these people are not white. So, and we can talk about whether or not people consider Palestinians to be white, but, so when you listen to this, just take note of that. And, maybe it's something else. Maybe it's that these other conflicts aren't as severe to the news, or I don't know. But I want to raise awareness about a number of of conflicts, and this isn't an exhaustive list, but there are a lot here that you can absolutely point to as significant. So there's Sudan, which has been experiencing a horrific civil war for the past year. Thousands of people have been killed. Millions of people have been displaced. And when they use the word displaced in the news, a better phrase for it is running for one's life. They're not just like, oh, let's go camping or let's move. This is running from your homes with whatever you can possibly carry because you are certain or you think that you will be killed. Your family will be killed. Your kids, your grandparents, your spouse, your siblings, your neighbors. You're going to be killed or tortured or forced into the military or something. So millions of people in Sudan have been running for their lives without very much help at all from either other locals or from the outside. Certainly there are lots of people helping, but they need a lot more help. And because of the running for one's lives and becoming refugees, it results in economic problems just as a society, but also individually, famine, rape, people being captured and tortured. And I find that these people have been suffering extreme, at the very least, you'd say on the order of other sufferings that we typically hear about in the news, but they're just completely forgotten by the rest of the world. And that's doubly horrific, right? To go through this is horrific, and then for the world to just forget them. And I'm a part of that. I'm a part of that. Myanmar is another country that is going through a horrific civil war. Some of you might have heard of this, and some of you might be very knowledgeable about all of these conflicts. The civil war in Myanmar has been going on for the past few years, and again, many, many people have died. There have been massacres, particularly of oppressed ethnic groups, similar to the Jews in World War II, really. It's that bad. And the suffering people have, in my estimation, been forgotten by the rest of the world. You also have Congo, the Democratic Republic of Congo. I think it's what it's officially called. You have warring factions, and this conflict has been going on for decades, like 30 years. Millions have died. Millions have been displaced, running for their lives. Again, food scarcity, sexual assault, torture, kidnappings, and also forgotten by the rest of the world. You also have a region in Africa that's sort of in the western area, the Mali-Niger region, and also warring factions for over a decade. A total crisis of humanity, and also these people have been ignored. Of course, you have Gaza. The oppression has been happening for years, but the current war, or the invasion, started last year. Nearly everyone in Gaza has been forced to run for their lives. Millions of people, thousands have been killed. And I think most experts have no idea how or when this will end. It's horrible. In Yemen, there's been a horrific civil war for the past decade. Thousands have been killed. Millions have been made to run for their lives. And also, these people have been largely forgotten by the media, or at least the mainstream American media. Somalia, warring factions, over 30 years. Millions of people have been displaced. Many people fleeing the area for other countries, other continents, like Europe, United States, because it's so dangerous. And just massive amounts of famine and disease and poverty and lack of medical help, forced marriages, children being recruited as soldiers. Haiti, which is pretty close to the United States, has been suffering from warring factions as well for several years, resulting in kidnappings, rapes, famine, lack of health care. Afghanistan, after the U.S. vacated a few years ago, the Taliban took over again, and the government has been systematically oppressing and killing minorities and women. The economy has collapsed for everybody, whether you're privileged or not, famine, displacement, etc. Syria, and I'm not saying all this to just depress you. All of these people deserve to be acknowledged. I don't know what acknowledgement is going to do, but I don't know, like something, I don't know. I just here getting her email, Sylvia's email, and having her say that, when I talked about Poland being included as, and I don't remember what I said, but I'm guessing what I said back then was Poland being close to the invasion and also taking in Ukrainians are also in danger, right? And they know from danger because of what has been happening to them over the last 150 years, the invasions and the rapes and the burning of cities and the deportations and the massacres that have happened. I mean, the Polish people have been through so much trauma over this, the centuries, really. And I'm quite sure that the current young people in Poland, although in years are really quite distant from those atrocities, feel the effects because of the effects that it had on their great-grandparents, which affected the way that they parented their grandparents, which affected the way that they parented their parents, which affects the way they parent them, And there are many other areas in the world where that is also true, including groups of people in the United States. Syria, there has been a horrible ongoing civil war for over a decade. I might have some of these details wrong, but this is from my knowledge base. Many people have died in Syria. I would hope most people have heard about this civil war. Millions have been displaced, again, running for their lives, famine, disease, lack of health care. Nigeria, warring factions for over a decade. Thousands have been killed. Millions have been displaced. Mozambique, warring factions for about, 5-10 years, something like that. Thousands have been killed. Maybe a million people displaced, running for their lives. And for some, there's nowhere to run because there are these warring factions that will just round up whole groups of people and massacre them or rape. And then that, the economy collapses and the powerful people control all the money and the health care. Meanwhile, everyone else is suffering from poverty and famine and disease and just utter terror. And there are other conflicts and wars and groups of people being massacred and ethnic cleansing. It's happening. And I think they deserve to be acknowledged. Maybe you are looking, or the algorithm for you, or you subscribe to podcasts or to newspapers that will highlight these sufficiently. And maybe there's little that can be done from us, right? I don't know. You would hope, though, that there would be a world response, that there would be a unified peace force from the UN or even something bigger than the UN, something that incorporates Russia and everybody, because these people don't deserve to be going through this. It's painful for them in particular, but it's also painful for us to look at it. So much so that many people, including a lot of media, just doesn't even look at it anymore. And to me, this is just me, it puts things in perspective. The kinds of things that I want to complain about, the kinds of things that I'm afraid of are, they pale in comparison to the kinds of things that, I'm not saying that it makes the current situation for me and my country trivial. No, but I don't know. I just when I read her email, I just thought, I don't normally do this, but I want to highlight the suffering that is happening in this way. This is just the suffering around what they call conflicts or civil wars. It's hard to categorize these kinds of mass killings or organized killings. And so I just felt compelled to do that. And I hope that it doesn't harm you that I'm mentioning that. Let's take a break. All right, back from the break. This email is from anonymous patron from UK. She says, "Hi, Dr. Kirk. A friend of mine," and by the way, I know who this is from because on the form she gave her name, and I feel like I've interacted with her many, many times. So, but I'm going to say for the public podcast, this is an anonymous person, even though she's not anonymous to me. Anyway, "Hi, Dr. Kirk. A friend of mine has an aversion to therapy and is currently seeing a life coach because she believes therapists focused on the past, whilst her life coach helps her in the here and now and the future. I find this baffling, as life coaches are not regulated and tend to come out with quackery. Some of the stuff her life coach says sounds super cultish. My therapist always says we need to understand the past but not live in it to move forward. I'd love to hear your thoughts on this." End of email. Yeah, I've heard this many, many times, and it's fucking ridiculous. We therapists, we in psychology, we counselors, we invented the forms of therapy that involved only thinking about the here and now and the future. We invented those philosophies. I mean, not necessarily the grand or general philosophy, but we developed evidence-based and well thought out and well defined forms of therapy decades ago. And to think that coaches would say, we've invented this new thing called working on the here and now. I mean, literally the phrase here and now, I think, comes from humanistic therapy, humanistic psychology, which was developed in the 50s by psychologists and psychiatrists and counselors. Look, if you want to be a life coach, great, but don't fucking lie and just Google it. But yeah, it's stupid. Now, could a life coach be mistaken, have been misinformed, and still be ethical and effective? Yeah, I suppose so, but it's a red flag, because if they indicate they don't know shit, then what other shit don't they know about? Also, it's evidence of being cut off from information. For them to have this ridiculous notion might point at them being cut off to a lot of things, might even indicate that they're in a cult, right? So it's aggravating. I support life coaches if they advertise themselves accurately and ethically, and they don't spread misinformation. But if they're gonna spread this shit, then because there's a chance that, because there's a lot of life coaches that will say this, there's a chance that as they propagate this nonsense, and by the way, these people are much better on TikTok, but as they propagate this, partially because you don't need any education. I mean, literally anyone can claim that they're a life coach. Anybody. You listening right now can start a TikTok life coach channel and just say you're a life coach. You can claim to be a life coach and without ever having a client. You can be a life coach for the next 50 years and never see a client and say, well, I'm a life coach, because it's a meaningless designation at this point anyway. And so for the public, there might be some people that see this shit and say, oh yeah, I don't want to talk about the past, so I'm never going to go to therapy. When they might benefit from both life coaching and therapy. But they might want to seek a therapist out that does the here and now. Humanistic therapy is defined as that. Humanistic therapy was a reaction against psychoanalytic and psychodynamic therapies, which often did involve talking about the past. And humanistic psychology is well known with many, many figures like Carl Rogers and Fritz Perls and Bugenthal, and the emotion focused therapy comes out of this with I'm forgetting all my people right now. Carl Whitaker and Virginia Satir and all these folks, they hated talking about the past. They only wanted to talk about the here and now and the future. So it's, let's move on. All right, this next email is from patron Katie, and I'm just going to summarize. It was a long email, but all important information, but I think I can summarize pretty quickly. Katie emailed in and said that her partner of 7 years is prone to jealousy and basically paranoia about Katie cheating on him. And he will often want to talk about it to get resolution or reassurance, or he will become paranoid and upset with her, and then she will have to address it and help him with it. Meanwhile, she is dealing with her own issues and has a lot of stresses in her life, a lot of big events, losses, and changes that she has to take care of. And they both have a 5-year-old child together, and she wants to be there for her kid. And she is in therapy. Katie is in therapy, individual and group therapy. And she has suggested, hey, this, you have this jealousy thing. How about we go to couple therapy, or you go to therapy yourself? And he refuses because he thinks that therapy is dumb or something. And Katie asks me what she thinks she asked me what I think she should do. And yeah, I mean, the way you frame it, Katie, it sounds extremely frustrating and difficult and impossible. You're doing everything, right? Taking care of the kid, you're dealing with your own losses, you are trying to keep things together, you're taking care of him at times, but at a certain point, you're thinking, I don't know if I could do this by myself, and even if I did have all the time in the world, I don't know if I can actually fix this problem in him, right? And I've tried to convince him to go to therapy, but he won't go. So yeah, I'm guessing a number of people in the audience can relate in kind. And I don't know, there's a lot of different things that I think of. My initial very knee-jerk reaction, which I don't think is very wise, is to say, hey, to your partner, just like, hey, you have these problems, and if you refuse to go to therapy, I'm going to refuse to help you with it, because this isn't the sort of thing that a wife can help you with. This is the sort of thing that a therapist can help. This has to do with your traumas, I think, because you think that I'm cheating on you all the time when I'm not, and I keep trying to convince you, and I keep trying to manage you and reassure you and deal with you when you're accusing me of stuff, and it's dragging us down. We have to talk about it for 5 hours. I've tried to do all those things, and I'm dedicated to that, but none of it worked, and it just keeps happening. So I think it's rational that you should try another method of solving this problem, which, as far as I know, therapy is the only answer, and I'm happy to go with you, but individual therapy might be helpful too. And I don't know what to tell you. You say that therapy won't help, or you don't like to go, but I don't know. I don't know what to do about that, because I'm fairly certain that therapy can help. I don't know if it will, and I don't know if you'll find the right therapist. You might have to shop around for a while, but I'm pretty sure that this is one of those things that you can work on. And if you want me to explain what I know, what I've learned in therapy myself, I'd be happy to do that. But I don't think you want to hear me. I've already said those things to you. I don't think you want to. So I'm going to have to draw a boundary with you about this jealousy thing. I know that I'm not cheating, and I don't know why you keep thinking that. Well, I think I know why. As an armchair psychologist, I think it's because you were abandoned by your dad when you were, or something like that. But I'm not your shrink. That's for your therapist to figure out with you. But it's not my problem that you have this thing that you refuse to work on. It'd be like if you broke your leg and you refused to go to the doctor to have it helped with, to have it put a cast on it or whatever, and you require me to carry you around the house for the next 15 years or for the rest of your life, and you refuse to go. It's like, at some point, I just have to say, look, this isn't my work area. I don't know if that makes sense to you listening, work area, but I always think of when I was in college, I was in a fraternity, and we all had different work areas, different chores that we were assigned. And if there was something dirty or wrong with an area and you got blamed, you'd be like, hey, not my work area. I have the second floor hallway to clean. I don't have the first floor bathroom. It's not my work area. So I don't know why. But the point is that that's my knee-jerk reaction. I don't know if that's very wise, because that is, I don't know, reactionary and might not actually account for your side of things, Katie, because if I heard the whole story, I might understand where he is coming from. I don't know. Maybe a more helpful thing to say, Katie, is to just go on a campaign, and all you can do is what you can do. You can't control him, right? So this is how I would approach it. It's just like, look, this is me talking to myself. I would say, I have tried, but nothing seems to be working, but I'm not going to give up. And here's the goal. I want him to find a therapist that he likes. I don't want him just to go to therapy, because he might go and he might actually not like the therapist. So that wouldn't be very helpful, right? So my goal is to get him to find a therapist that he likes to work with, and that he starts working on this problem. And here are the 10 bullet points that I'm going to do, that I accept, that I'm okay with, and that don't require any action from him. The success of this bullet point does not rely on him doing anything. So I can say, I did that bullet point this month, and next month I'll do it again. And it would be something like, I had to sit down with him for 10 minutes and I said all that stuff. Or I sent him a YouTube video that I think might help him to have a more accurate understanding of what therapy is, to help him discard the stereotype or the misinformation that he's absorbed about therapy or whatever. And the reason why I would do it this way is that if I were in your shoes, Katie, I would be chronically worrying and trying to figure out the answer to the problem and negotiating in my mind about how to handle this. And it would really occupy my brain. But that assumes that there's an answer, right? If the brain is turning away on something, the reason why we do that is because we believe that the churning will result in a positive outcome. But you've already done all that, and he might not ever change. Or the way that you're trying to get him to change isn't helping him change, which is another possibility. So what I would do is I would try to distance myself from the emotional impact of it and just make it systematic for me. Just make it like a quick little easy thing that I can do every now and then. And I can move on with my day. I can spend 30 seconds or 2 minutes on the thing every few days, and then I move on, because I have decided that there's no amount of churning of my own brain that will result in meeting that goal. So why waste my time and energy and emotions, I might even tell him that. Might even say, look, here's my approach, and I'm going to be doing this. Is that okay with you? Or how do you feel about that? And I'm sorry, but for my sake, this is why I'm taking this approach. I still love you, and I want to be with you, but I can't take on the responsibility of your traumas. All right, let's take a break. More emails. All right, we're back from the break. This email is from an anonymous patron. She writes, "Hi, Kirk. I really enjoyed listening to your deep dive on love bombing. I got out of a relationship that I believe was a love bombing situation last year. After the breakup, I had heard many people, actually most of which were his friends and family, describe him as a narcissist and a sociopath. Even a therapist recently described him that way. But thanks to your discussions on the ethics of diagnosing from afar, I was able to recognize that that was not appropriate, and I have broken up with that therapist since she has never met him, and this was our first session. I might have otherwise felt validated and good about that kind of comment." Just chiming in here. Well, it's very wise of you, anonymous patron. I mean, I wasn't there with the therapist, so I'll take your word for it in terms of that being a good decision. But in terms of the things you're highlighting, yeah, you're very wise in this way. And so just kind of drilling down on what you're saying, I did a deep dive on love bombing. When was that? Maybe a couple years ago. And you're saying that after you broke up, you're talking with your friends and family, and they're all calling him a narcissist and a sociopath. And you were also telling a therapist in the first session about him, and that therapist also called him a narcissist and maybe a sociopath. And then you recognized, anonymous patron, that that was diagnosing from afar, and also just a tendency to oversimplify, personality. Like any bad behavior from anybody is automatically they're a narcissist. I mean, literally, that's what the internet will say. And a lot of clinicians, unfortunately, will too, because I don't know if I've said it in this way, but there are, and I felt this when I was a novice clinician, that you graduate with a graduate degree and you feel both qualified to do the job and very unqualified to do the job. And the people around you have a similar level of qualification. So you don't really notice the deficits in your knowledge. And you are just trying to make ends meet. You're trying to get your career off the ground. You're trying to survive, pay off your student loans. And you don't have a lot of time to figure out what more you need to learn. And the kinds of continuing education courses that are typically offered don't address the key deficits in the knowledge and experience base of novices. But what happens is that the novices aren't novices forever. And they might be 25 years, 40 years into their profession, and they still have never learned what they needed to learn because they don't know what they don't know. They don't know what they're supposed to learn. And the things that they're supposed to learn are complicated. And the other aspect to it is that when I was a novice, and I see this among a lot of other novices, is you also feel unqualified, and you feel like there are whole areas of psychology that you don't know enough about, and you feel it. And there's various different approaches to dealing with it for very differentiated, very mature people, which you might argue don't really exist, because I certainly wasn't one of them. They will strive to attain that knowledge. But for a lot of therapists, me included to some extent, I just wanted to bury my head in the sand and act like I knew everything. Or I just wanted to say, I don't really ascribe to that area of theory, or I'm this sort of therapist and I don't need to know that information. And one of the major areas in psychology that is the most difficult to comprehend is the area of personality. And it's something that is taught to freshmen in college, right? You'll have like abnormal personality or whatever. And so it seems like it should be something that you should understand, but it is not. It really is not, particularly when you have professors that also don't really understand it, or they don't understand how to teach it. And they just teach the DSM, which is insufficient. So you could have a psychopathology professor that knows a lot about disorders. They know a lot about bipolar and depression and social anxiety and autism, but they don't know everything about personality disorders, because those other things that I mentioned are also, they require a lot of time and effort and experience. And even then, you might not really get it completely. And then you might not be able to teach it, especially in the limited time available. I've talked about this before, that a typical graduate degree in psychology, whether it's a master's or a doctorate, whether you're becoming a psychologist or a master's level therapist, you might have a max of 3 days or 3 weeks, I should say, of personalities, like every personality disorder, all of them, not just borderline in 3 weeks, but all the personality disorders are covered. And there's a chance that some graduate students only had 1 or 2 weeks, and the professor might not have known anything about it. And they might just have had a PowerPoint where they just flipped through the various different criteria that are in the DSM and moved on to the next chapter, which blows right past personality disorders. So you have all these people, and they develop these coping mechanisms. I don't need to know that I don't believe in personality disorders. Or I don't ascribe to personality. I don't ascribe to the DSM. I don't diagnose people. I don't believe in diagnosing people. Okay, it's fine, but you need to understand the basics of human functioning and the basics of the human mind. You're working with the human mind, right? You're a therapist, so you should have some way of you don't have to ascribe to the model that I ascribe to, but you best have some way of conceptualizing the human mind. You are a therapist, you are a psychologist, you are working on the human mind, right? Hopefully. Do you have a way of conceptualizing the human mind, or at least behavior? And maybe they do. And there are people who have, in my book, totally viable conceptualizations and models. Behaviorists, for example, they don't really think about personality, but at least they have a model. But I'll find that there are a lot of therapists that don't even really understand that, because there's not enough time given. And the amount of time that would be necessary, it's not like 1 or 2 extra classes. It could require another 5 years of graduate school. I mean, that's how much maybe longer for me to really understand it. So it's hard. And so you have a lot of therapists out there that they have this giant hole in their knowledge base, and they go on TikTok and they absorb the stupid notions of a narcissist, and they go, oh, I get it. And they just propagate those ideas, and they start diagnosing from afar because they have no fucking clue. But it's not their fault. They want to know. They want the knowledge. If we gave it to them, they would take it. If they were given better knowledge in graduate school, they would ascribe to it in all likelihood. They're trying. They're not doing it on purpose. And it's hard. I have the luxury of having been a professor, so I would get paid essentially to learn stuff so that I could teach it. And just being at a university, you just pick stuff up. Also, a huge part of my knowledge base is because I've been a podcaster for 16 plus years, and I have the luxury of getting paid to do like dissertation level deep dives. I've done, I've written a dissertation and a lit review and all those kinds of things. And I can tell you that the kind of effort that I put into some of these deep dives is at the same level of reading all the literature and conceptualizing it, categorizing it, figuring out gaps in research, having a way to present it, having it all in your working memory so you can draw connections and teach it. And the only reason why I've had the luxury of doing that is because of the patrons, essentially. They pay my bills so that I can sit in front of my computer and I can sit in my library and just read and take notes and think and then talk, And there's also nothing like talking and teaching, like making a deep dive to really drive home those ideas. So it's tough. So I both will, cringe and condemn a therapist that would diagnose their brand new client's boyfriend from afar as being a narcissist. But I would also say, I don't know what else that person was supposed to do given their education and given the landscape, So I don't know the answer to that. I wish that there was, this just popped in my head. So my brain, while I was trying to figure out a solution, it started with mentorship, right? Because that's a big part for me is, give every student a very good mentor. But then I thought, well, of all the people who were trying to mentor me, a very small percentage of them were actually any good. Some of them were flat out harmful, abusive to me. So I worry about that. But then I think, well, if every student gets a mentor, then there wouldn't be enough mentors to go around. Mentors have to spend a lot of time mentoring, and there's not enough of them. So then I thought, well, how about they all just listen to this podcast, which is a totally narcissistic thing to say, that, there's a lot of the knowledge that I think, in my opinion, therapists need to know available on this thing that I've been doing for 16 and a half years. You might have to become a patron to get access to some of it, and I know a lot of you will use the podcast in this way. You, as clinicians, will email and say that it's helpful, keeps you learning, and it'll supplement your supervision and your graduate degree. Well, I'll tell you, one of the nicest, every once in a while I think about this when I need a boost. I was getting my doctorate and I was making the podcast. It was the early days of the podcast. So this is like, 2010, so 14 years ago. I had already got my master's degree 15 years prior, and I was now getting my doctorate. And I was in class, and a classmate of mine, a friend of mine, it was during break of class, we're sitting next to each other and we're just chatting, and he says, "Oh, by the way, I listened to your podcast." And I thought, and it's always such a trip to have someone in your life that all of a sudden tells you that, because you're just like, oh my God, like, so much more about me and my life or what I'm interested in or something than I know about you, right? It's a very strange feeling. And also there's a kind of a shame of just like, oh no, I'm sorry that you had to listen to my rantings and yammerings. But anyway, so I'm like, oh, really? And he says, and he whispers to me, because we're in class. He whispers to me and he says, "Yeah, your podcast, I've learned more than being in graduate school, being in this doctoral program." And now, I'm sure he was just being nice, and that's an absurd notion, because being in graduate school, of course, has a tremendous value, and it's very intense, and there's a lot of things that you learn. But anyway, I think about that sometimes. I'm just like, oh wow, and he meant it. And the thing that I understood from him was I had been taking a lot of the same classes as him, and I would not have thought that he would have that experience, but I was thinking a similar thing, that the classes that we were taking were not very good, and the teachers did not really know how to teach well. In fact, the class that we were currently sitting in, although I loved the professor, he was a really nice guy, he would teach from a PowerPoint, and our classes are 3 hours long. So he would just have this like really overly jumbled PowerPoint where you could tell he would literally just copy and paste the book, the PDF, into the PowerPoint, and he wouldn't really clean it up. I mean, maybe some fonts here and there, but the golden rule of PowerPoint is don't have paragraphs. PowerPoints are for bullet points and graphics, not for reading. If you want to read something, give them a book or a handout. Don't have people squinting at the screen in a classroom reading like several paragraphs of small print. That's not what a PowerPoint is for, and that's what he would do. And that was just the beginning of it, because he wasn't very good at imparting knowledge. The impression I got was that he had a lot of experience, and the university just needed someone to teach the class. And even though he didn't have any experience or expertise in teaching, they just thrust him into the job. And again, nice guy. But anyway, so going on with your email, I took a lot of, so Anonymous Patron was talking about love bombing and about how everyone around was calling him a narcissist and a sociopath. And the Anonymous Patron is saying, well, after listening to your deep dive, I have a much broader understanding of the possible conceptualizations as to why someone would love bomb, because there's a lot of other possibilities. So going on with the email, I took a lot of value from your in-depth discussion on love bombing, and I think a part of me recognized there was love bombing even in the relationship, but the larger picture of what happens after the idealization phase gave me a greater sense of clarity. Just chiming in, this is what I was talking about in terms of the idealization that can happen in some types of love bombing. The love bomber will be idealizing. They're not doing it to manipulate. They're literally seeing this other person as the answers to all of their problems dating back to the day they were born. It's a very intense feeling for them. And the way it will come across to you is it'll be experienced as love bombing. Anyway, your example at the beginning of the episode was just about as close as can be to my experience and was somewhat eerie to hear. Just chiming in. Yeah. So the example that I gave from my memory that I think I just made up was pretty confidently given because I've seen it so often. It's a very common experience. Anyway, going on. He is now love bombing someone else who lives halfway across the world who he cheated on me with, and I am trying to get back out and find a healthier relationship where my needs are met. The biggest struggle I've come across is the question you mentioned. How will I know if someone genuinely likes me or if they are love bombing me? Your points have helped a lot at the end. Yeah, just chiming in. Right, so the question that I came to this question as I was doing the deep dive. I was like, well, wait, and I love these points in the prep where I'm pulling all the information together, and then this question emerges that I don't see in the literature or even in the public discourse. And I say to myself, wait, so how? Because as I'm reviewing love bombing, what that looks like, I'm thinking, well, a lot of these things are actually the sort of stuff that makes the world go round, like believing that someone is beautiful and is wonderful, and you want to spend all your time with them, and you want to just hold their hand, and you just want to stare into their eyes, and you want to talk about getting married and having kids, and you want to talk about the future. And, it doesn't matter that you've only been dating for a month. You're in love. You're falling head over heels, and they're in love with you. And you don't want to talk to anyone else, and you just want to give them gifts, and you just want to look in their eyes and say, you are the most wonderful, beautiful, smartest, wisest, specialist creature that has ever been created by God. When you're in love, that's how you feel, hopefully. I don't know about you, but it feels good to have those feelings. But how do we differentiate that from love bombing? And the way that the internet discourse is it's just like they'll just say the same thing, but there'll be like an evil music background, you know? He says that you're his everything. He says that you're beautiful and you're smart, and he laughs at all of your jokes. You know what I mean? It's like, he says that you're beautiful, and he says you're smart, and he laughs at all your, it just depends on how you say it. So I was trying to figure out, well, what is the difference? How would you know? And I came to the realization that the litmus test is flexibility. That when someone is loving you, and they say they love you, and they want to get married and move in together, and they might be asking to do it pretty soon or right away, the love bomber, when you say, I don't know if I want to move that fast, the love bomber will not take it well. But the person who is not love bombing you might be a little bummed, but will absolutely roll with it. Why? Because they love you, and this isn't done out of desperation. They're not in love with you. They are in love with you. They're not in love with solving their traumas. Those are two different things. They're not desperately in love with you, if that makes any sense. To the person who's love bombing, they, like one example of a love bomber is, might we say, the cluster B, the histrionic, narcissistic, borderline love bomber. This individual was abused and or abandoned growing up, and they've never had a close relationship, and they have suffered a lot throughout their life, often shooting themselves in the foot as an adult. They managed to cultivate the beginning of a relationship with someone, and after a little bit of time, they feel safe with you. And that feels very, very relieving to them. And for anyone, that would feel great. But they have needs that are on the level of what it feels to be a 2-year-old or a 1-year-old, which is very intense, right? And cannot be regulated easily anyway. And so, like a 2-year-old, they don't want to let go of you. A 2-year-old, when they love their parent, it's not mutual, right? There's not a back and forth. The 2-year-old doesn't really care, and shouldn't be made to care, about the parent's feelings, very much anyway. And that's developmentally appropriate, or developmentally right, if you I don't know the right word for that. But whereas when you're 25 or 35 and you see this new dating partner, as you feel as though this person is going to meet those needs that you didn't get met when you were 2 years old. You don't know this because it's all unconscious. It's not fitting. That's a better word. It doesn't fit. It's not going to work. It's dysfunctional because the other person has a life, and so do you. You're supposed to still function as a human being, and you're also supposed to have flexibility. Even when you're deeply in love and you desperately miss that person, but you have enough flexibility and enough ego strength to be able to say, okay, I don't need to see her every minute of every day. And she doesn't want to move in right away. I do, but she doesn't want to. And I love her, and I don't want to bother her. I want to have her feel like she has the rights or the space to say no to that right now. And that hurts. I might even say, ooh, that kind of hurts. But I'm not going to force you. I'm not going to intimidate you. I'm not going to flip out. And for this type of love bomber, when you push back and you start to, so you push back, and then the cluster B love bomber starts to get angry, punishes you emotionally, might even get physical potentially, but at the very least is being intimidating and, well, fine then. I don't want to be with you if you're not going to be committed to this relationship. You don't care about me. You're just like all the rest, or whatever. And you're in love with this person. So you're like, oh, no. Okay, let's move in. So it's a very different experience. And that's the litmus test. I don't have research on this, but it coheres for me. And where's the line, right? Where's the line between being flexible versus someone just being bummed out and just advocating for what they want, saying, "Hey, I'm 33 and I only have so many years left to have kids, and I'd really like to get married soon." It's case by case, but to me, it has to do with how it feels. And whenever I am talking to a victim of love bombing, and the question of pushing back or slowing down is brought up, the victim will say, "Oh no, I can't tell that to them. If I were to say to my partner, I'm not ready for the next phase, or I want to slow down, my partner would freak out, and I'm afraid of, and then I might ask them, do you feel afraid? And they would say, yeah, I feel afraid to push back on what they want this relationship to be." Well, that says something, right? It's one thing to feel like, oh, I don't want to hurt his feelings. This is going to bum him out. That's different than I'm afraid, and I don't know if I want to tell him that I want to push back. Maybe I should just go along with it. It's a very different vibe. Now, both people might be in love with you. It's contrary to what TikTok will say. Love bombers are not all quote unquote narcissists, which really all they mean by a narcissist is a psychopath, someone who is a con artist, and maybe even specifically a sadistic psychopath, which is a particular brand of psychopath, because not every psychopath comes after you. By definition, a psychopath isn't necessarily wanting to harm you and control you. They're more likely to if you get in their way, but a sadist does want to harm you. They set out to harm, and they don't care about you. Anyway, so anyway, you were saying, how will I know? And then you're saying, your points have helped. And then you go on, I find myself dating someone new who I think may be too far on the other end of the spectrum, very slow moving, and hard to tell if he even likes me. So when I, just chiming in here, when I read this, I think, one, it's possible that, you just rolled the dice and the pendulum swung the other way. And this guy, is just genuinely really, really slow, maybe avoidant personality or something, avoidant attachment. The other possibility is that there was something that attracted you to the first guy in that he did move fast, and that is intoxicating. And it does relieve you from the responsibility of having to drive the car, And so this guy might actually be average moving pace, but because he's not love bombing, it feels like he's slow. And I've seen this before as well. I've worked with clients who interpreted average moving people to be moving slow. But going on, but I don't know. I'll take your word for it that he, this is the pendulum swung and you just rolled the dice, or maybe it's an overcompensation. You're just like, I don't want a love bomber, and so you unconsciously chose someone that was very slow moving. Going on, he will make plans and his actions seem like he does. But I fear there is a lingering desire to get back to the beginning of the relationship, even in a totally new relationship. I didn't really understand that sentence, but moving forward. I fear that my baseline or standards have been warped by the past relationship, and I wonder if you have any experiences with people who have gotten out of love bombing relationships and struggled to readjust their expectations and find a healthy partnership. Thank you so much for all you do. I appreciate the insight you bring. I really, really do. End of email. Well, it really depends. There's so many things that have to be assessed and conceptualized, most importantly you, because you're giving information about these two guys, but there's a possibility that your lens is distorted, right? It's also possible that you just rolled the dice. A lot of dating is just rolling dice. We look for patterns, and that's important. a lot of good therapy and good healing and good self-awareness comes from looking at our patterns in dating. But I think sometimes we can go too far with that and assume that all of our misfortunes have to do with something about us or something about dynamics. I'll just tell you for myself, with my wife, Stacy, when I met her and we were hitting it off, pretty quickly, I realized, not pretty quickly, after a number of months, I realized, because I had come to that conclusion that in order to find a compatible, healthy, loving, stable relationship, that there was always going to be a struggle, and there was always going to be personal traumas that were going to get triggered on both sides, and there was always going to have to be in-depth negotiations and attachment talks and family of origin work and couple therapy and everything. And I was okay with that because I'm up for it and I'm not afraid of it. But meeting Stacy, it just worked, and it didn't require all of that stuff. Like 95% of all that I thought was always going to be necessary wasn't necessary. Some work for sure, but it just worked. We were attracted to each other, fell in love, and the love has always been there, and it was easy. And I thought, that's nice. What a refreshing experience. And then I think, well, what was going on in the past? Was I pathological? No, I was the same in recent history. So it was just roll the dice, just who you happen to bump into in the universe. And when you find that person, grab on tight and love bomb the shit out of that person and never let them go. Anyway, but you see, you worry that your baseline and standards have been warped. Yeah, it's very likely that you're affected by that past relationship. It's unknown if this is the effect, but I don't know if we want to call it trauma, but if we just talk about trauma in the general sense, relational trauma, you were in all likelihood relationally traumatized by this past love bomber, because I'm guessing that it was harmful and hurtful and scary and gaslighty on some level, maybe abusive, I don't know. If everyone around you is calling him a narcissist and your therapist is calling him a narcissist, I'm going to take a guess and say that there was a lot of harm, and that's going to have an effect on you. It might not be this. It might not be that you're now expecting it or something. It might just be that this guy just moves really slow. But he might be exactly what the doctor ordered because it might feel safer to you. So there might be a pro and a con there of just it's a con because it feels distant, but it's a pro because I'm given a lot of room to feel safe and not pressured. I'm given a lot of, one of the questions you might want to ask yourself is, what do you want? Do you want more intensity? And if you do, maybe ask for it. Maybe that's what he's waiting for. I don't know. There's just a lot of different possibilities. But let's adjourn there. I feel like my email episodes are getting real, I don't know what you call it, spontaneous, authentic. That's a better word. I don't know if it's just post-election stuff or something, but I think I'm also in the midst of watching Love is Blind a lot and posting, which I love, but I end up working a lot, and I haven't really had a day off in a long time. I'm actually curious when the last just day off I had. let's see, the last day off was over a month ago, so probably like 5 or 6 weeks ago. Stacy and I went on a road trip, so I didn't work at all for about 9 days. And then before that, it was 2 months before. Normally people have like weekends, not me. So I don't know. It's my life. I make it. It's no one else's fault. But so I think that's part of it too. I just feel like my brain is frazzling on some level, but I feel good. I feel happy. I think another part of it was, full disclosure, I was doing a live stream recently, and actually in my timeline, it was yesterday. Right, so it was yesterday that I was doing this live stream. Today is the 13th of November to me. This episode will come out on in a future date, but so the election was just 7 days ago. The determination of the winner was just 7 days ago for me, and yesterday was a live stream, and I normally really enjoy those, and I did for a lot of it, but people asked politics questions, and I wasn't ready to respond. My general policy was just to say I'm not an expert, and I don't know what to say, because that's really how I feel. I mean, I have things to say, I have thoughts, and I have my own take, and I have my own plan and my own emotions, and I have a fair amount of, I would guess I have an above average knowledge of history and of how the government works and stuff, just because of the luxury that I have of education and of time to pay attention, that kind of stuff. But I just don't feel like I have anything to offer, and I'm not very good at talking about it. I find that I just start to get upset, honestly. And when people are asking, I responded, and I held it together for a bit, but then as things started to come off the rails for me. And I think I'm still reeling from that. I felt, and there were some comments too, like people were commenting in the live stream, and people were saying, interesting point, or offering their own opinion, or thank you for saying that makes me feel better, or something. But there were also people that were not saying those kinds of things, if that makes sense. And so which I totally get, but I don't know. I just felt like I was upset at myself for having gone against my general policy to blab about politics. I don't feel like, from my own experience on this podcast, I don't feel like I have anything to offer in that way. I don't know enough. I don't know how to say it, or I don't know how to be persuasive, or I don't know. And this isn't a political podcast. Now, we talk about political things, right? We talk about oppression and being fair to people, and we talk about the societal problems and the dogma of American materialism and individualism, and these are all politicized, I suppose, or apply to some political topics, or women's rights and the right to choose what they want to do with their body. And so these are politicized, but to me, I don't think they're particularly political. I think they're just inalienable rights. They are, what's the other phrase from the Declaration of Independence? They are self-evident. They're not political. They're, like I said, they're politicized. It's sort of like saying that it's political to believe that, generally speaking, a lot of vaccines are helpful for most people. That's not a political statement. That's just an observation of data, right? But it's become politicized anyway. So, but I'm doing it again. But yeah, I think I've been in a bad mood on some level, and if it's come across in the podcast, I apologize. Also, my mentor died, and there's a lot of feelings about that, and there's a lot of feelings about it that okay, so full disclosure on that, and I won't say much, but I recorded a 3.5-hour episode about my mentor dying, and I had edited it basically, and had written a little blurb for it, because there's always a little blurb in the description, and I sent it to Alina for a review and gave it to Stacy to be posted, and everything was ready to go. And then I just started thinking about it, and I was like, I don't feel good. And so I pulled it, and so I'm saying that because there's a lot of very complicated feelings about a lot of things, I guess. And what's relevant here and now is I have been thinking lately, maybe just since yesterday with the live stream, so maybe it hasn't been going on for a long time, but no, I felt this way actually when I was recording some of the email episodes from last week. Point is I apologize to you, the listener, if I was starting to wonder if people were wondering if I was losing it or something, or if I was getting old and jaded and angry and crotchety or something. And maybe I am, but I don't want to be. And a lot of it has to do with attitude and with mindset and with behavior and with lifestyle and taking care of myself. So if I have come across like I've been in a bad mood, sometimes life calls for a bad mood, but I think as a podcaster, that's not generally how I want to be. So I'm working on that. And everyone out there, I commit to taking care of myself, and you as well. Let's all take care of each other because we deserve it. We really, really do.